Okay, so I feel like chatting, and I already talked everyone's ear off in my life about this topic, so I am just gonna film myself while crocheting talking about it because I feel the need to rant. I'm filming this in parts because I'm exhausted right now, and the only thing I knew I'd be able to get out is my rant portion of it. So, and I'm also just like mindlessly crocheting because it gives me something to do with my hands so my hands aren't just like, yeah. Anyway, it's like not a surprise to anybody right now that the youth of America is struggling in like more ways than just one, but the low literacy rates and math competency is the scariest, at least in my opinion. And I wish that more people were focusing on it. And I feel like it's very easy for people to just straight up blame the kids. But again, they're kids. I was doing random shit at that age. If somebody didn't tell me what to do, I was gonna do whatever I wanted. Like, you act in like what you want in that moment. You haven't learned, not that kids like don't have self-control, but like they need to have guidance to be on the right track. And I know I didn't understand at that age that education was exceptionally important, and especially that it is a right, and unfortunately lately it seems it's more of a privilege than a right. But yeah, I just wanted to rant about the American public school system as somebody who works in the public school system. And the way I wanted to start off was I wanted to compare the budgets to 3 schools, one that I was a student in and then 2 that I previously worked in, because they're really not that far from each other, and how drastic each district is insane in regards to what is accessible, because it's not the same. And it's weird to think that kids who can live like a street over from each other will get completely different educational experiences based off of the revenue that a school has. Well. This is my little presentation portion of this.
Pause. My damn collar was stuck like that this whole time, and I did not notice until right now.
Now, everybody else has those cute little microphones. I don't have that. I do have a lightsaber though, so that's what I'll be using because I like feeling like I have a microphone. I will be talking about 3 different schools, but because I don't really want to say the names of the schools, they're going to go by School A, School B, and School C. School A is the school that I was a student at. School B and C were each 2 different school districts that I worked in. I have my laptop because, sorry, I wasn't remembering all of this off the top of my head. And all of the information I got on demographics and revenue came from the website Donors Choose. And that's basically a website where it was made by teachers and they help raise money for like classrooms and everything. It's cool. And it also talks about like the educational divide and everything. It's cool. In the school that I was a student at, across the entire district, 48% of the students were on free and reduced lunches, while 30% of that student population were students of color. It had a revenue in 2016 to 17 of $57.4 million, with 53.6% of that coming from local revenue, meaning like property tax and everything. In School B, one of the schools I used to work at, this is so much easier, why didn't I think about this? Out of the district, only 20% of those students were on free and reduced lunches, and 35% of the student population were students of color. Now, this school received $228.1 million in 2016-2017, with 78.7% of that revenue coming from local. Also, I feel like I have to say, the school that I went to as a student only had 4 schools in the district. School B that I worked in had, 19 schools? 19 schools in total. So obviously there's going to be a lot more revenue. It's proportional to how many students are in the district as a whole. Now, for school C, out of the district, 32% are free or reduced lunches, with 73% of the population being students of color. This school district received $120.9 million in 2016-2017, with 45.5% coming from local revenue. Where it gets interesting though is if you break it down into the elementary school category as a total, because those are a little bit different than the whole district. For school A, the elementary school is pre-K to first grade. 41% of the students were on free or reduced lunches, with 34% students of color. School B, the elementary school is pre-K to fifth grade. 18% of those students were on free and reduced lunches, with 36% being students of color. School C has the elementary school going from pre-K to third grade. 59% of the student population in that elementary school is on free and reduced lunches, and 70% of that school are students of color. Now, I'm not bringing up the demographics for no reason. There continues to be a racial and socioeconomic inequity in the American public school system, and I wanted to lay out the schools that I personally experienced. So that was all of them. And unfortunately, the quality of schooling is directly affected by how much funding is in the school, obviously. But I feel like I was not the best person to talk about all of this. There is a TED Talk by Candace Sumner. It's called How America's Public Schools Keep Kids in Poverty, and it describes the topic in much better detail. It is a wonderful resource. Now, during her talk, her first quote was, "School funding should not be decided by property taxes or some funky economic equation where rich kids continue to benefit from state aid while poor kids are continuously having food and resources taken from their mouths." And if you look at the revenue from each of the schools that we looked at, the better off schools had the most revenues coming from local sources, aka property tax. So school A had 53.6% coming from property tax. Then you had school B had 78.7% of the revenue coming from local revenue. But then we come down to school C, and school C has 45.5% coming from local revenue, but it has 50.1% coming from the state. It's because it's in a lower income area. The better off schools have more revenue coming in from local sources, aka property tax, while other schools had a less percentage of local revenue than state revenue. And to quote Ms. Sumner again, if you neglect a child long enough, you no longer have the right to be surprised when things don't turn out well. And there are so many quotes that she made in this entire talk that encapsulates that experience, and I wanted to share them all with you because she's a wonderful educator and I think she talks about this topic so much better than me. My favorite one that I think really describes this the best is when she said, "Knowing that strangers will take care of you is a privilege my kids aren't afforded." And that is true. And in that, she also talks about donors choose, which again is where I got my information from. And unfortunately, that statement hits close to home because these kids don't have all the right equipment that they need, all the resources, even just new books. Because another thing she talked about was how when she put up her fundraiser on Donors Choose, how strangers every day were sending in new books that were on her list, all this other stuff, and her kids were so excited. And she talked about how it wasn't that they didn't want to read, it was that they will gladly read if the resources were presented to them. Many of these kids in these schools where the test scores are low or anything, it's not because they don't necessarily want to learn, they feel forgotten. And if you feel forgotten, it's almost like, not that this is the right way to look at things, but as a kid you're like, well, why would I try if nobody cares about me? Which is so sad. The last thing I want to leave it on from Miss Sumner's talk was, she said, when resources are shared, they are not divided, they are multiplied. And I wish that that was something that in all aspects of life people understood. When you share, especially a resource such as knowledge, all opportunities are going to be multiplied. There's going to be more innovation. On a similar note to what Miss Sumner said about you can't be surprised if you neglect a child long enough that it doesn't turn out well. There was another TED Talk, because I love TED Talks, by, I believe he's a doctor, Jeffrey Canada, and it's called Our Failing Schools, Enough is Enough. And I mean, in the whole talk, he speaks more to my frustration about the whole system. And the one part of his talk, he said many insightful things, and I'm linking everything because I can't possibly sum up how wonderful and insightful that talk was. But the one thing that I think stands out the most, especially when it comes to funding, is he says, America cannot wait another 50 years to get this right. We have run out of time. I don't know about a fiscal cliff, but I know there's an educational cliff that we are walking over right this very second. And if we allow folks to continue this foolishness about saying we can't afford this. So Bill Gates says it's going to cost $5 billion. What is $5 billion to the United States? What did we spend in Afghanistan this year? Now, this TED Talk was from 2011. But the decline can already be seen. And then he pointed out what I think is the crux of all of this. He said, when the country cares about something, we spend $1 trillion without blinking an eye. And that's where my frustration comes from, because that shows where the country's care lies. And it's not in the schools as much as that they want to say. It's not. Because they're always talking about, oh, funding this, funding that. You would find the funding. It's so fucking annoying that there are so many things that can be fixed and aren't, for fuck knows why, in my opinion. I think, how do I say this? So many things are done ass backwards in the American public school system. And a lot of the stuff that gets done would have been 10 times harder than the things that educators and students are asking for. So to say, in Dr. Canada's talk, it just proves the point that this country truly does not care about the education of the youth, specifically students of color and the economically disadvantaged. Now, this is not new information, not in the slightest. We've known this, but everybody want to act like it doesn't exist. So, hopefully, I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but if I become annoying enough about it, maybe people will, pay attention so they can get me to, shut the fuck up. Anyway, I can go on and on all day. I hope what I talked about makes sense. I am not a financial girly. I tried my best to lay everything out to the best of my ability, but yeah, I can go on and on all day. And I just got home from work and I got sneezed on today, so I would like to take a shower. So that's what I'm gonna do. So most of the things that I talked about affect all of the children in the American public school system, but what I'm about to say next is specific to the special education and special needs experience. They suffer the most from lack of resources and, at least in my experience, face the most hostility. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is mainly a rant, because I couldn't believe the lack of empathy from school districts, and it isn't just one. Multiple school districts across the nation have very similar problems, but again, I only speak from what I know. And honestly, one of the things that truly pisses me off, and I can't believe how many times I've seen shit like this happen in the past 2 years, is that there's a misconception that these children don't understand what is said to their face or in their presence, especially nonverbal children. Obviously some are lower functioning than others, but these kids can still pick up on tone and facial expressions. They're nonverbal, they're not unable to hear. And it's exhausting the amount of times I've heard things said to or about these kids in front of them. When a child is actively having a behavior and somebody looks at them and says, "You're the reason everybody's leaving," no, they're not the reason everybody's leaving. The reason everybody's leaving is because the school is understaffed and they only bring in 1 or 2 people who are trained RBTs for the entire school. As an RBT, I handled 1 kid. I wasn't running around the entire school trying to work and help every single kid who needed an RBT. That's why these people are quitting. Not because this child's behavior pushed everybody over the edge. I just remember, I heard that and I was like, are you serious right now? First of all, the kid is 6. So yeah, the staff is overworked and underpaid. So yes, the behavior going on is very overwhelming, especially when it's only one staff member that is responsible for the entire school, trying to help every single special needs child in the building. It wouldn't be as overwhelming if it was properly staffed. But again, I still don't see any need to say that to a child in their presence. Or, like, I remember the amount of times where people would call, like, the kids assholes, or, like, just talk about them, and they're like, yeah, they're allowed to deal with it. They need your help. And, like, there's probably a reason why they don't like you, and it's because they can sense that you don't like them. The way that a lot of people talk about these neurodivergent students, and again, I can only speak for elementary school. I don't know what it's like with the older ages, but it's like, they're still people. But then again, people don't really treat neurotypical kids as if they can understand what's going on. So I don't know why I expected any more. There's no understanding. And I understand that things are said when put in a stressful situation, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just... No, I don't think I'm being harsh. There's no reason to ever say that to a kid. Like, just because they can't verbally say something back to you doesn't mean that they do not understand what you're saying. And I'm rambling on about the same thing. I just keep repeating myself, but that really made me mad. Anyway, these kids have different needs, and there's no understanding and little to absolutely no tolerance for children who doesn't act the same way that a neurotypical child acts. Their sins being different, their needs are not recognized, and their attempts to communicate are being seen as them being difficult, and it's not fair. They are doing the best that they can with what they have, which, at least for a lot of the schools I've worked in, is none. How do you expect a nonverbal child to be able to communicate with you when they don't have PEC boards, or they don't have an AAC device, or they haven't been able to get to speech because there's been other things going on? Like, they have these services, and these poor teachers who are trying to get the stuff done, something always seems to get in the way where they're being pulled to go do something else. And then the district turns around and blames it on the teachers. But anyway, all of this puts educators into an impossible position. The district is basically throwing them to the wolves and hoping that they can still fill out paperwork at the end of the day. And at least from what I've gathered, most of the districts are out of touch with what daily life in the classroom is like, which is why it feels like a slap in the face to educators when most of them on a daily basis will probably deal with like multiple crises at a time while being in an understaffed room just trying to keep everything afloat, and then the district's on their back for not responding to paperwork that was just emailed over to them 5 seconds ago. It's ridiculous. The districts are then shocked there's a teacher shortage and a substitute shortage. But one of the things that makes me, I think, the most upset is that when a child needs a different placement because the school isn't meeting their needs, especially if they are special needs or anything, most of the time, because it costs money to send them out of district, they will not get placed anywhere else. And unless they're creating a ruckus or like being loud or causing a disruption in any sort of way, they will not get recognized. So a student who's lower functioning and could really benefit from one-to-one attention, working on more social things. Anyway, they don't send these kids out of district, and then they just end up sitting there because there's not enough people to go around the classroom and help everybody. It's just so fucking stupid that unless a child is creating a major ruckus, they will not even get the time of day. Like, they don't have access to things like sensory rooms or even AAC devices, so how do you want them to communicate with you if there's no way for them to communicate? There's no PEC boards. You can teach them sign language a little bit, but it takes them a little bit longer to pick that up. And then they're like shocked when they're not improving or they're not communicating. How do you want them to communicate? You don't have anything for them to communicate with. Do you ever get just so angry that like all your thoughts just get jumbled up in your head and you're like, I had a way I wanted to articulate this and I can't because I'm just mad now. I think I've been sitting here in silence for like 5 minutes just trying to figure out how I would like to word what I'm trying to say. I've been like angrily crocheting. And now, this topic is obviously much more personal to me as it's things that I experience on a daily basis, and I know that there's a lot more anger, so obviously there's a bias on my end. But after experiencing everything firsthand as a student and as an educator now, am I an educator? Is a TA an educator? Someone who works in an educational setting. Like, how can you not be upset? And like, again, I'm a TA, I'm not even a teacher. I could not imagine being a new teacher, like, at 23, I'm 23, being this age and trying to break into that sphere. It's overwhelming, especially when you can only do so much and you know it's not enough. They did give me the preschool plague though. Oh my goodness. Now, I know for me, like, this is not what I planned on doing, not even close, with my life. So before COVID, I was a film and theater major, and I changed majors during the pandemic because nobody knew what was going to happen. I was doing improv in my bedroom on Zoom, and I remember sitting there. Do you know those points when you like zoom out, like you can see outside of yourself, and I was kind of like, what am I doing? It is 2020. I'm pretending to be an old person in my childhood bedroom. So yeah, I ended up changing majors because I didn't know what was going to happen next. Like, I had dreams of creating art, and I still do, and I would hope throughout my life it's something that I can keep working towards and hopefully achieve. It's something I want to pursue. I never want to let myself not create things. But for now, it is very difficult to imagine myself leaving what I'm doing because I almost feel like a sense of guilt, like you'd be abandoning them, especially because there's such a shortage. Like, you wouldn't only be abandoning the kids that you help, but also the other teachers, the other aides, everything. And it feels like there's a need to stay, at least for the time being. I know it's not what I would like to do forever, but I like to think that people are where they need to be for the time being, and I'm hoping I can just take it one step at a time. I don't know. It's where I have so many dreams that sometimes it's very difficult to pick just one. If I can help them as much as I can in the moment, that's all I want to do, because it's devastating to see these little ones never even get a chance to succeed. It's ridiculous. Like, imagine how many nonverbal kids would be able to express their needs if they were given the proper support and supplies. Like, if every kid who needed it had an AAC device or PEC boards. It's unfortunate because their needs go unheard so often that their wants aren't even on the table. A lot of people can't fathom that they would have wants, which is fucking ridiculous. But sometimes it feels like people forget that they have wants, and that nonverbal does not mean non-existent. Just because they cannot communicate with you what they need or what they want does not mean that they do not want or need anything. In the same vein, how many kids could have progressed even further academically if it was acceptable for them to self-regulate rather than being punished or deemed as a nuisance for their sensory needs? It's a shame because understanding, acceptance, and accommodations are things that are constantly preached, yet they're rarely ever practiced. I don't know. Just something to think about. The only thing I could think about right now is that, remember when Jenna Marbles Used to do the, I'm a 32-year-old lady. I'm a 23-year-old who selfishly needed to rant about this because if not, I'm just gonna scream. It's exhausting. However, I will say, lots of people that work in public schools and then go home and have their own kids. Because, let me tell you something, I get in my car every day, I sit in silence, I don't listen to anything on the way home. Silence. I drive home, sometimes I'll sit in the car for about 5 extra minutes. I walk in the house, I tell everybody to leave me alone. And then I go up and I take a shower, and guess what, half the time I fall asleep. So I couldn't imagine going home and having to like take care of a family after this. That's insane. Better than me, like I don't know. Anyway, thanks for listening to my rant and crafting with me.